Hey guys, tonight we're going to listen to a story. Not just any story, but a story about a story, told on a rainy night, while you drift off under soft covers, just like a certain princess with a very unfortunate mattress situation. The rain outside is steady now, clicking softly against your window pane, like tiny fingers drumming for attention. Thunder murmurs low in the distance, and your room, dimly lit, blanketed in shadows, feels a bit more magical than usual. You settle in, maybe under an extra blanket, maybe with one leg defiantly hanging off the edge of the bed. Bold move. You're about to wander into a castle where water drips from stone ceilings and stories echo through echoey halls. But quick warning, you probably won't survive this if you're expecting a peaceful, uneventful night. Royal families are complicated, mattresses are heavier than you'd think, and honestly, no one's really sure what counts as a real princess. The criteria are questionable. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The wind rattles the shutters as you close your eyes. You're not in your bed anymore. You're walking, barefoot, along a stone corridor slick with damp. The rain is pouring in sheets outside, the kind of rain that muffles everything, that hushes the world. You trail your fingers along the cold wall, the moss between the stones, slightly squishy. A torch flickers ahead. You found yourself in a castle, a hulking, ancient structure, perched on a cliff overlooking a dark, churning sea. The kind of place where lightning loves to strike dramatically, where ravens probably have unionized, and where everyone seems slightly underdressed for the draftiness. As you pad into a long, echoing hallway, a small dog, something fluffy and vaguely judgmental, trots past you. You follow it, because why not? It leads you into a vast room, thick curtains pulled back from arched windows, heavy tapestries sagging with moisture, and the sound of soft voices rising and falling near a large fireplace. The rain taps harder on the stained glass windows, creating a percussive rhythm against the soft drone of conversation. Candles flicker. You spot a cluster of people in elaborate robes. Half-asleep nobles listening intently to an older man seated on a carved stool. He's mid-sentence, one hand dramatically raised. A storyteller. You ease into a seat on the edge of a velvet chaise. No one notices you. This is the kind of dream where you get to observe without being observed. And the storyteller, he doesn't just speak, he conjures. His voice is low and rhythmic, perfectly paced to the thunder rumbling in the distance. Every now and then, he sips from a goblet, clears his throat with theatrical flair, and resumes. Tonight, he says, is a night for royalty, rain, and riddles. A tale of a prince searching for someone real, not just someone beautiful, not just someone smart, but someone authentic enough to be bothered by a single tiny object buried beneath layers of comfort. Someone who could pass the most absurd test in fairy tale history. You lean in, but even as you do, the rain deepens in tone, heavier now, like it's trying to drown out the story. You notice a puddle creeping along the edge of the room. A noble lifts their robe with a sigh, and the storyteller chuckles. You know, he says, people used to think storms like this were sent by the gods, as warnings, as punishments, or sometimes, if you're very lucky, as inspiration. It's true. In many medieval courts, violent weather was seen as divine expression. If the roof started leaking during a coronation, that could doom a reign. If a thunderclap struck during a speech, you might want to rewrite your notes. He smiles, revealing one slightly gold tooth, and says, "But I prefer to think the rain just likes stories." A few heads nod. You feel it too. The way a rainy night makes a story settle deeper in your bones. Maybe it's the quiet. Maybe it's the primal memory of huddling in caves and thatched huts, swapping myths while storms howled outside. Or maybe the rain is just dramatic. You notice the storyteller shift forward. He places the goblet down. His fingers form a steeple. The tale, he says, begins not in this castle, but in another. Far away, long ago, one filled with corridors like veins, thrones cold with power, and a prince who could not sleep because he could not find someone who truly belonged. A few nobles snicker. Someone mutters about royal pickiness. The storyteller ignores them. You close your eyes for a second. When you open them again, you're no longer in the castle of the storyteller. You're in the story now, inside his tale. And it's raining there too. You stand in the courtyard of a different castle now, one a little more well kept, but equally damp. The downpour has slowed to a fine mist, just enough to make your clothes cling and your hair stick to your forehead in that charming but vaguely miserable way. Rainwater dribbles down from carved gargoyle spouts, pooling along the flagstones in odd, squelchy puddles. A serving boy hurries past with a bucket held over his head like a helmet, mumbling something about leaks in the royal quarters again. You follow him with your eyes and notice the rows of narrow windows overhead, some shuttered tightly, others dripping. No amount of wealth, it seems, can keep the weather out when it really wants in. Inside the great hall, tapestries billow gently with the drafts, their rich fabrics swollen from damp. A fire crackles in a wide hearth, but it barely touches the chill. The scent is earthy, old stone, wet wool, and the faint sweetness of drying herbs hung by the windows. This isn't just an old building, it's a sponge in fancy clothing. And yet, life moves on. A scribe hunches over a parchment scroll, dipping his quill, even as drops plop rhythmically into a pewter pan on the floor beside him. Water drips from the ceiling like a lazy metronome. You spot three noblewomen sharing a fur cloak like a picnic blanket, exchanging complaints about how even the peacocks look bedraggled. At the far end of the room, the prince sits. He's young, not too young, but wears that expression of someone trying very hard to look thoughtful while mostly thinking about how wet his socks are. He watches the rain with a furrowed brow, as if he's been wronged personally by the sky. This castle, his castle, hasn't been able to keep the storm out. Not the wind, not the rain, and certainly not the creeping doubt in his chest. He sighs. He has danced with duchesses, dined with princesses, debated with heiresses. And still, he's not sure any of them are the real one, whatever that means. His advisors mutter about alliances. His mother drops increasingly unsubtle hints involving embroidery samplers and baby names. But the prince, he wants something else, something certain. And now, thanks to the rain, his castle has sprung leaks in both the ceiling and the soul. You wander through the stone halls as he does, your steps echoing on the damp floor. You pause under an archway where a gargoyle's eye has become a miniature fountain. A guard with an impressive mustache nods at you, adjusting his soaking tabard and muttering, "This blasted storm's been going on 3 days. A beat. Might be cursed." And he's not entirely joking. You see, in the Middle Ages, weather wasn't just weather, it was commentary. Heavy rain was often seen as divine disapproval. A storm during a wedding could mean bad luck, an omen. There are records of entire feasts being delayed because thunder struck during the carving of the roast boar. Very inconvenient timing. Some even believed fairies or forest spirits caused bad weather if they were offended. Others blamed witches. One poor monk in the 13th century France kept weather logs so detailed that modern meteorologists still scratch their heads at his accuracy. But also note he believed demons lived in the clouds. Historians still argue whether rain rituals in royal courts were performative, spiritual, or just a way to keep peasants distracted. Either way, the idea was this: when it rained, something needed fixing. The prince would probably agree, especially when he steps into his bedchamber that night to find water trickling directly onto his pillow. His servant helpfully moves the bed. It still leaks. He moves it again. The new spot leaks faster. A third attempt places the bed right next to the fireplace, which immediately smokes out the room. And so, the prince gives up on sleep. He wanders. You follow. Eventually, he ends up back in the great hall, now quiet and echoing. A few sleepy guards doze against pillars. A fire burns low, licking the sides of a bronze cauldron. And there, by the hearth, sits the old storyteller, again. The prince clears his throat. "You've got another one in you?" he asks. The storyteller smiles, slow and knowing. "Always, especially on a night like this." He pats the bench beside him, and the prince, finally shedding the weight of titles, sits. You lean against a pillar, invisible, watching. The storyteller's voice is rough with age, but clear. He begins to weave a new tale, one curiously similar to his listener's own. A prince, a storm, a castle with bad plumbing, and the aching wish to find someone truly real. You notice how the hall seems to lean into the sound. Even the storm quiets, just slightly, like it too wants to listen. Above, the rain still falls through the cracks in the ceiling. But in this moment, no one minds. The fire pops softly as the storyteller shifts in his seat. He lets the silence stretch, just long enough for it to become intentional, then draws a slow breath and begins the story properly. There once was a prince, he says, who had everything a prince is supposed to have. A crown that looked impressive in paintings, a horse that didn't bite, and a castle with more stairs than friends. A few guards chuckle. Even the prince cracks a smirk. But, the storyteller continues, he also had a problem. A heart-shaped problem. He wanted to fall in love, but only with someone real. Not fake real. Not ceremonial real. Not, yes, I memorized all the names of your ancestors real. Actually real. You trail your fingers along the carved bench as his voice paints the tale. The castle around you fades. In its place, the story rises. You now walk through the fictional castle, the prince's castle in the story within the story. Layers upon layers, like nesting dolls made of stone and rain. The new prince is pacing, just like the old one. His advisors are squabbling. His tea is cold. And you know this prince, don't you? He's a mix of all the royals who've ever looked wistfully out of windows. He has a perfectly arranged collar and absolutely no idea what to do with his feelings. His problem isn't the lack of princesses. No, they come by the cartload. With retinues, harpists, banners, and horses that sparkle like they've been vacuumed. But none of them feel right. They curtsy too sharply. They speak in rehearsed phrases. One recited an entire diplomatic treaty as pillow talk. Truly chilling. So the prince waits. Rain pours. And then one night, during a storm that hammers the shutters and moans in the chimney, there's a knock at the castle gate. Not a royal convoy, not a perfumed carriage, just one figure, alone, cloaked, soaked to the bone. She says she's a princess, but you, standing nearby in this imaginary scene, note the mud on her hem, the rain in her hair, the shiver she can't suppress. She doesn't look like the usual sort. There's no dramatic flourish, no jeweled forehead band, no well-rehearsed declaration of lineage. The guards, predictably, raise eyebrows. Sure you are, one mutters. Still, she's led inside, if only because it's raining so hard that the guards are starting to turn into soup. She's led past torchlit halls and suspicious maids, past suits of armor that haven't been polished in decades, past a court jester who pauses just long enough to eye her shoes and then shake his head solemnly. Finally, she's brought before the queen. Ah, yes, the mother. The storyteller leans forward dramatically. Now, this queen, he says, was not someone easily impressed. She had once disarmed a diplomat with a teacup and was rumored to be able to spot a forged genealogy at 10 paces. She eyes the guest. A long, slow look that could scrape the varnish off furniture. A princess, are you? She asks, in that tone parents use when someone says they want to major in poetry. The visitor smiles, polite but firm. I am. A beat. Very well, the queen says. Then you must be tired. Now you already know where this is going. The test, the mattress tower, the unassuming legume that would become a royal litmus test. But for now, none of that has been said aloud. Historians still argue whether mattress tests like the one in our tale were ever symbolic rituals or just pure fiction. There are theories that it was a metaphor for sensitivity to others' suffering, or proof of true femininity, or even a cheeky satire on how fragile nobility had become. But the queen in this story? She's not thinking metaphorically. She's thinking practically. She wants to know, is this girl really who she says she is? The guest enters the room, escorted by a servant holding a flickering lantern. She gazes up at the mattress stack with the facial expression of someone who's just realized they may have agreed to the wrong Airbnb. I sleep here? She asks politely. The servant nods. All yours? She climbs a short ladder and clambers awkwardly to the top. Not very royal, you might note, but points for determination. When she finally lies down, she sinks, just slightly, into the top layer, the blankets puffing up around her like a deflating souffle. You sit in the corner as the candlelight dims, and the room falls quiet except for the occasional creak of the tower beams and the endless patter of rain. And that's when it starts. A fidget, a sigh, a twist, another twist, a fluffing of pillows, a brief moment of stillness, then a slow, defeated groan. She turns over again. The storm outside seems to lean in, listening. She tries lying on her back, then her side, then her other side. Then whatever that one position is that's 10% fetal and 90%, please let me wake up with fewer regrets. Hours pass. You sit silently, watching as the night stretches on. Each time the wind howls, she flinches slightly. Each time lightning flashes, her silhouette shifts in the blankets. She can't sleep. It's not the storm. It's the thing under the bed. You wonder what that says about her. Is it sensitivity? Royal nerves? Spine awareness? Whatever the reason, she tosses and turns until dawn paints the walls in pale streaks. And by then, she looks wrecked. Beautiful, but wrecked. You stand as she rises, blinking blearily into the gray morning light. Her hair is tangled. Her back is hunched. Her expression is somewhere between traumatized and mildly offended by life. The test is complete. She doesn't even know she took it. You trail her as she descends the tower stairs, each step echoed by the soft thud of distant raindrops and the low groan of waking castle timbers. At the bottom, the queen is waiting. Tea is poured, bread is sliced, and everyone pretends this is a normal breakfast. But you know better, because a single pea has done more to change fate than any banquet or ball ever could. Down in the great hall, the morning light filters through rain-streaked windows, turning everything the soft gray of wet parchment. The fire has been rekindled, though it battles the damp like an elderly knight taking on a dragon with a warm biscuit. The princess, or the girl who claims to be, shuffles in, wrapped in a borrowed robe that's about 3 sizes too big. Her hair is a mess of curls and dreams interrupted, and her eyes have that glazed, red-tinged look of someone who has recently lost a wrestling match with their own betting. She takes one look at the breakfast spread: plum preserves, cold meats, something that might once have been an egg, and sighs. The queen, already seated and looking suspiciously smug, greets her with that gentle tone nobles use when they're about to ruin your life or offer you a promotion. "I trust you slept well," she asks, lifting a porcelain teacup to her lips. The girl hesitates. Her eyes dart to the prince, then back to the queen. And then, honestly, this is where she could have lied. She could have smiled, made up something polite about the view, and made her exit with dignity intact. But she doesn't. "No, actually," she says, rubbing her lower back. "It was dreadful. I barely closed my eyes. I felt something hard all night long. I'm bruised." Silence. The storyteller's voice softens in your ear. "And that," he says, "was all the proof the queen needed." You watch the queen set her teacup down with the kind of satisfied elegance only people with secret knowledge truly enjoy. She glances at the prince, who nearly drops his fork. He's staring at the girl like she's just stepped out of a dream and into his breakfast nook. And maybe, in some way, she has. Because she passed the test. A real princess, the story goes, would have skin so delicate, so refined, so absurdly attuned to comfort that even the tiniest irritation buried under 20 mattresses would keep her awake. That's the lore, anyway. Now, whether this is a valid method for determining someone's identity or just a weird flex from a monarch who needed hobbies is up for debate. In fact, historians have squabbled for years over the symbolism of the test. Some argue it was a commentary on the excessive fragility expected of noble women, an absurd standard baked into social expectations. Others think it was pure satire, a kind of medieval what if scenario that got picked up, passed on, and polished until it became moral folklore. A few scholars even speculate it had nothing to do with royalty at all, but was once a cautionary tale about sensitivity in relationships, emotional or otherwise. Still, it persists. And here in the echoing hall, with the rain still humming against the roof, it all seems oddly plausible. The queen has seen what she needed. The girl has said the right thing, not out of cunning, but truth. The prince rises from his seat, not dramatically, but like someone who spent years waiting for something to click and just heard the last puzzle piece snap into place. "She's the one," he says softly. You'd think the room would erupt in applause, or at least a dramatic musical flourish, but instead, it just exhales, like the castle itself has been holding its breath for days. The girl looks stunned. The queen smiles a little. The prince, for the first time in weeks, actually looks like he slept well. And you step back into the dream and begin to drift again, though not far. You're still in the story, but you're also drifting through its framework, its scaffolding, peeking behind the royal curtains. Because here's the curious part. This tale, The Princess and the Pea, didn't begin in a royal court or a rainy castle. It was first published in 1835 by Hans Christian Andersen, a Danish author with a flair for the bittersweet and slightly weird. He wrote it as part of a collection of fairy tales, blending old oral traditions with his own original twist. Andersen claimed it was based on an old folk story he'd heard in childhood, though no exact version predates his. Some say it may have been inspired by Swedish or Dutch folk tales that use similar motifs: the hidden test, the outsider, the soft-spoken trial of authenticity. But Andersen's genius was in boiling it all down to a single image: a pea, a stack of mattresses, and a girl too real to sleep through it. Historians still argue whether Andersen meant the tale as social critique, romantic idealism, or just as a bit of bedtime absurdity. One theory suggests it was a commentary on how impossible it was to prove authenticity in a society obsessed with bloodlines and titles. Another posits that Andersen, who was often insecure about his own humble origins, was exploring the absurd hoops people jump through to be accepted. And maybe he just wanted to write something cozy, something that would echo on rainy nights like this one. Either way, the story stuck. It seeped into nursery rooms, bedtime routines, stage plays, and even mattress commercials. Seriously, there's one with a CGI pea that's a little too enthusiastic about sleep disruption. You glance back toward the storyteller in the flickering castle hall. His voice is lower now, a slow drawl laced with embers and age. And so, he says, the girl and the prince were wed. The castle finally quieted. And the queen, though she never admitted it, began to respect her new daughter-in-law. A few chuckles ripple through the chamber. The rain begins to soften, almost shy now. The storyteller raises his goblet. To sensitivity, he says, sometimes it's the only way to know what matters. You lift an invisible glass. The story isn't over yet, but its heart has been revealed. The storyteller leans back, his voice trailing off like the last wisp of smoke from the hearth. Around him, the hall is quiet, the rain outside having settled into that soft, hypnotic drizzle that seems to hum in harmony with human breath. The prince stretches, murmurs something to a sleepy page, and disappears down one corridor, off to reflect, or perhaps simply to nap. But the story still lingers, thick in the air, and you're still here, seated in the shadows, as the storyteller sips from his cup and, with a sly glance at no one in particular, says, "Funny thing about rain, it's the oldest special effect in the world." You tilt your head. He's not wrong. Rain has always had this way of setting the mood. Think about it. No one sits around a bonfire telling ghost stories in bright sunshine. No one whispers old legends under blue skies with birds chirping overhead. No, it's always the stormy nights, the ones where thunder tucks in behind the tales like a drum roll, and lightning flickers at just the right dramatic pause. The storyteller knew what he was doing. You watch as he shifts, adjusting his cloak as another log is tossed onto the fire. Sparks rise. The few people left in the hall huddle closer. The thunder returns, gentle now, like an old dog curling at the foot of the bed. He raises one bushy eyebrow. You know, back in the day, people used to schedule their storytelling for nights like this. A younger guard nearby laughs. They scheduled rain? No, says the storyteller, lips twitching. But they didn't not schedule stories around it. And it's true, sort of. In many medieval cultures, the appearance of a storm was treated not just as weather, but as atmosphere. Before the printed book, before bedtime podcasts, wink, stories lived and breathed in real time, told aloud in mead halls, cloisters, or crowded kitchens while rain danced on the rooftops. In Norse households, sagas were shared during winter storms as a way of weaving memory through darkness. In the British Isles, folk tales traveled with the rain, carried by traveling bards who often found shelter and an audience when the weather turned. One odd detail: in some alpine regions, it was considered bad luck not to tell a tale during a thunderstorm. People believed the silence might invite something else, something listening. Historians still argue whether this was genuine superstition or just an excuse for social bonding. But either way, rain became the unwritten cue. Time to gather, time to listen, time to pass something down. The storyteller lets the silence stretch again. You shift in your seat, feeling the pull of the moment, the way the fire and rain seem to trap the room in a bubble of now. Then he begins another tale. No preamble, no setup. Just slips right into it like a warm bath. You follow him into this new dream. And oddly, you're back in the same castle, but a different wing, a different generation. The rain is still falling, but everything is warmer, cozier. There's the smell of stew from a lower kitchen, and the faint clatter of distant servants playing cards with their boots off. You follow a servant girl this time, someone young, someone overlooked. She's tidying the great hall after a feast when she hears a strange sound, a laugh, sharp and rich, from behind the curtain. She peeks. There, seated in a windowsill, is a visiting courtier, a woman. She's older, elegant in that scary kind of way. She beckons the girl over and says, "Would you like to hear a real story?" Of course she does. The courtier tells a variation of The Princess and the Pea, but this time, the test is different. No mattresses, no pea. Instead, the supposed princess is asked to pick a single true sentence out of a page of carefully constructed lies. She gets it right. Because real people, the courtier says, can feel what's false. The servant girl laughs, then tells her own story. A local legend about a spirit who lures travelers into thorn bushes with the sound of music. The courtier nods. You've got the bones of a bard, she says. And that's the magic of rainy night stories. They evolve, they twist, they belong to whoever dares to tell them. The Princess and the Pea has hundreds of cousins. In one, it's a walnut shell hidden under the pillow. In another, it's a dream, disturbed by the sound of a weeping willow brushing the glass. You wander through this imagined version of the castle now, watching stories bloom like moss on stone. Servants whispering legends in stairwells, guards making up nonsense tales to impress each other. A librarian who swears the books rearrange themselves during thunderstorms to hide the dangerous stories. It's all wonderfully absurd. But it's also comfortingly human, because rain gives us permission to pause, to talk, to listen, and on nights like this, to believe, even just a little, that stories might be more than words. The fire in the great hall begins to dim. The storyteller stretches, bones cracking like old wood. His voice lowers again, almost a whisper now. I suppose you're wondering, he says, What happened to the pea? You chuckle. You were wondering that. Well, he continues, it was placed in a cabinet of curiosities, right between a mermaid's comb and a bottle of thunder. And every so often, someone would come to stare at it. A little green speck. Proof of royalty? Proof of absurdity. Proof of something. He shrugs. Or maybe it just rolled under the bed and was swept away. Either way, he says, it did its job. And so did the story. The storyteller leans forward now, his elbows on his knees, eyes glinting in the firelight. Around you, the hall feels even quieter than before, like the stone itself is listening. Outside, the storm has settled into a dreamy rhythm. You can hear the water running in steady streams off the eaves, plinking into barrels and puddles with soft, predictable splashes. It's a lullaby in liquid form. He says, of course, no good tale ends without a little complication. That's the rule. Ask any bard worth their wine. You smile, because of course it doesn't. Even in fairy tales, especially in fairy tales, things get messy just when everything seems to be tying up in a neat little silk bow. And so, as the storyteller continues, you find yourself once again inside the tale. But now, it's the morning after the announcement, the one where the prince boldly declared, she's the one where, supposedly, everyone lived happily ever after. Well, not quite yet. You're back in the castle of the tale, the dream within the dream. The banners are already being dusted off, and cooks are squawking over menus for a royal engagement feast. But down in the servants' quarters, the gossip is boiling over like an unattended pot of stew. Did you hear? One says, folding linens with aggressive enthusiasm, all because of a pea. I think she planted it there herself, another mutters. Seems suspicious, doesn't it? Real princesses don't come in during thunderstorms, says a third, who has definitely never met a real princess and probably never will. It's a palace of whispers now. And you realize something. The test may have proven her sensitivity, but it hasn't yet earned her acceptance. The prince is overjoyed. He doesn't care about the noise, the murmurs, the sideways glances. But the queen? Well, the queen is watching. From high balconies, from the top of stone staircases. She watches the girl, now treated like royalty, dressed in velvet and pinned with brooches she clearly doesn't know how to wear, and wonders if she made a mistake. Or worse, if she's being fooled. The storyteller pauses. He looks around the firelit room, then lowers his voice again. You know, he says, queens rarely trust just one test. You nod. Of course they don't. One pea does not a dynasty secure. So, in the story, the queen arranges another trial. Less literal, more social. A royal reception filled with nobles, wine, dancing, and the kind of thinly veiled shade that only aristocrats can truly master. You attend, invisible as always, drifting through the glittering crowd. You see the girl try to dance a formal measure and accidentally step on the ambassador's foot. She mistakes a duchess for a kitchen maid and asks her for more butter. She tries to compliment a lord's falcon and accidentally insults his entire ancestry. It's a mess. And yet, there's something undeniably charming about it. The nobles start off scandalized, but slowly, very slowly, cracks begin to appear in their frozen smiles. A few chuckle. One or two even lean in when she speaks. Because here's the thing. She doesn't pretend to know everything. She laughs at herself. She asks real questions. She's honest. And in a place like this, that's rarer than gold. Meanwhile, the prince is just beaming. Every time she makes a social misstep, He grins like it's another point in her favor. At one point, he says, "Isn't she perfect?" And you're pretty sure someone in the room chokes on a fig. The queen watches from her throne. You can't read her expression. She's seen many women parade through this court, each polished, practiced, and perfect in exactly the wrong ways. This one is different. Not graceful, but grounded. Not clever in the sharp-tongued way, but deeply aware of everything around her. She notices the serving boy with the torn hem and offers him her handkerchief. She thanks the harpist. She asks the stable master how the horses handle storms. She feels everything. And maybe, just maybe, the queen finally sees what the test was really about. The storyteller clears his throat, pulling you back to the firelit hall. Royalty, he says, isn't just about blood. It's about bearing. And bearing isn't something you learn. It's something you live. He smiles, though it doesn't hurt to survive a pee. A few people chuckle, but softly. The mood is dreamy now, like everyone's halfway between memory and slumber. Rain still falls. You barely notice it anymore. The fire crackles. Someone sighs contentedly, and the story wraps itself around you again. The wedding approaches in the tale, and everything starts to glow. The castle is strung with ivy and lanterns. Tapestries are unfurled. Even the clouds seem to part slightly, as if the storm itself is curious to see how this ends. But even as the dream-softened light filters through stained glass, you realize the story isn't about the prince or the queen or even the wedding. It's always been about the girl, the sensitive one, the one who came in out of the rain and said, "I didn't sleep well," because she didn't need to prove herself. She just needed someone who would believe her when she spoke. You drift now through the castle halls on the morning of the wedding. The air smells of damp stone and cut flowers. Roses, mostly, arranged in tall iron vases by maids still half asleep and wearing yesterday's aprons. Outside, the rain has finally stopped. For the first time in days, the sky opens like a sigh, spilling silvery light across the mossy courtyard. People bustle like ants with a shared secret. Bakers haul towers of almond-stuffed pastries into the kitchens. Tailors do emergency embroidery touch-ups on velvet sleeves. A harried steward is overheard threatening to feed a minstrel to the moat if he plays Greensleeves one more time. And you? You're just floating through it all, like a feather on the updraft of a fairy tale. The bride is in her chambers, not pacing, not fretting, just sitting. She's staring at the hem of her wedding dress, threaded in gold, too much of it if she's honest, and trying to decide whether it looks regal or like someone spilled soup on snow. The queen enters without knocking. A power move. You both know it. No fanfare, no escort, just the two of them in that quiet, sunlight-dappled room. There's a moment when neither speaks. You can hear the tick of the ornamental clock on the mantel, the faint birdsong outside, the creak of the floorboard when the queen shifts her weight. Then, finally, the queen speaks. You could still walk away. It's not a threat, not even quite a test. It's something stranger, a kind of offer, one cloaked in formality and layers of maternal suspicion. The girl, still technically a visitor, still somewhat damp from days of downpour and doubt, meets the queen's gaze. And she says, without hesitation, "But why would I?" There's no cleverness in it, no smugness, just that infuriating kind of calm that people only manage when they've already decided who they are. The queen stares for another long breath, then reaches into her sleeve and pulls out the pea. Yes, that pea. You blink. It's been dried and polished to a faint sheen, the sort of thing you might find nestled in an old reliquary or mounted in a museum exhibit titled Whimsy and Power, Objects of Fairy Tale Royalty. The queen holds it out. This, she says, has caused more nonsense than 100 jousts. The bride accepts it delicately, turns it over in her fingers like she's holding a tiny universe. And here's where the story inside the story begins to curl back on itself. Because now, you're not just watching a wedding day, you're watching the shape of a myth being sealed. The storyteller's voice returns, half laughing, half serious. Every court needs its relic. Some have crowns, some have swords. Ours? A legume. He sighs dramatically, prompting a snort from one of the guards nearby. But that's how it works, he says. You hang a symbol on something small and silly so you don't have to say the hard parts out loud. And what are those hard parts? That love doesn't come with guarantees. That people can be fragile and still be strong. That truth can hide in bruises and broken sleep. You follow the bride now as she makes her way down the long corridor to the chapel. Musicians straighten their backs. Nobles nudge each other meaningfully. Someone releases a pair of doves, which immediately fly into the rafters and refuse to come down. Symbolism, slightly disrupted, but still salvageable. The chapel doors open. She enters. The prince, already at the altar, turns, and he smiles like he's just spotted the answer to every riddle he didn't know he was asking. She steps forward slowly, with a dignity born not of rank, but of decision. You drift above them, watching as the vows begin. The words are familiar, formal, full of ancient repetition and hopeful cliches. But you notice the way they look at each other, not like royalty, but like two people who've survived a storm together. And isn't that the point? Historians still argue whether medieval weddings were about love or property. Most were arranged, sealed with contracts and cattle. Romantic marriage didn't gain ground until much later. Thank the troubadours and, oddly, the plague for that shift. Nothing like existential dread to make people reconsider marrying for affection. But here, in this story, in this castle, it's different. The storyteller murmurs, some tales make room for love, even if they start with tests. And that pea? It's tucked into a little velvet box and handed to a footman, who promptly drops it into the font by mistake. You watch it sink, slowly, like a seed returned to the earth. A new beginning, or just the end of something old. The couple kiss. The guests applaud. The bells ring out across the wet rooftops. And somewhere, far off, thunder rolls one last time, just for the drama. As the couple walks hand in hand out into the fresh morning air, sunlight finally breaking through the last of the gray, you feel the dream shift. Not end, just shift. Because in a world full of rain, the best stories are the ones that grow. The wedding has ended, but the castle does not sleep. The party begins the way all royal parties begin, with a horn blast from someone who's had far too much mead and a troupe of minstrels who were definitely hired last minute. Tables are dragged into the great hall. Platters appear from secret kitchens like magic. Wine flows. Bread is torn. A roast peacock is presented and promptly ignored in favor of whatever's in the garlic stew pot. You find yourself drifting through the celebration like a breeze between curtains. The guests are merry, or at least convincingly so. There's a lot of clinking goblets, exaggerated laughter, and that one uncle who insists he once dated a forest spirit. No one believes him. He tells the story anyway. At the high table, the prince and his bride sit side by side, not stiff and formal, but relaxed, hands occasionally brushing beneath the table. The bride leans over to whisper something, and he laughs, not a performative, court-polished chuckle, but a full, open laugh that earns glances from the nobility. There's something quietly radical about it. This isn't a staged fairy tale moment anymore. It's just two tired, sensitive people sharing soup and secrets after surviving a very weird week. The queen sits nearby, watching with her usual hawk-like stillness. But even she cracks, ever so slightly. When the bride accidentally uses the wrong fork and shrugs without apology, the queen doesn't scold. She just smirks, sips her wine, and mutters something under her breath that you're pretty sure translates to, well, at least she's consistent. The feast continues. Someone starts dancing, badly. You join the crowd as the bride is pulled to her feet by a younger cousin who demands she try the turnip circle, a traditional folk step invented sometime last Tuesday. She does, awkwardly, but enthusiastically. The prince joins. Then the guards. Then the queen's steward, who sprains his pride, but nothing else. It's absurd. It's perfect. The storyteller's voice floats back into the scene now, quieter, softer, as though speaking directly into your ear. Rain, he says, has a way of washing things clean. Stories, too. He pauses. Do you know how many versions of this story exist? And now you're drifting again. Not through the castle this time, but through time itself. You land in 19th century Denmark. Hans Christian Andersen sits at a simple desk, quill in hand, a soft rain tapping on the window behind him. He's tired, lonely, and full of stories no one asked for, but that he writes anyway, because what else can a heart like his do? He pens a short tale, barely a page long, about a girl who can't sleep, about a test, about the absurdity of proving worth through discomfort. And just like that, the princess and the pea enters the world. It's not a sweeping epic. It's not a grand romance. It's just a strange, tiny fable. But it sticks. You flicker forward in time. France, 1912. A ballet adapts the tale with floating sets and a prince in turquoise tights. Then England, 1950. A child's picture book features a smug-looking queen and a giant pea the size of a goose egg. In America, 1959, it becomes a musical, Once Upon a Mattress, where the princess is loud, brash, and allergic to protocol. It's a hit. People laugh. People listen. The story evolves, mutates, adapts, and always, at its core, the same strange truth. Sometimes, being too sensitive isn't a flaw. It's a signal, a hidden strength, a quiet rebellion. Historians still argue whether Andersen's original tale was autobiographical. Some believe he saw himself as the pea, a small, unwelcome presence disrupting the smooth fabric of society. Others think he identified with the princess, misunderstood, out of place, but ultimately vindicated. And then there's the fringe theory that the pea isn't a metaphor at all. It's just a pea. And that's the joke. You float back into the wedding hall now. Someone's lighting more candles. Someone's asleep on a drum. The bride and prince have vanished quietly, slipping away like the last note of a lullaby. You follow, just a little. They're walking in the gardens. Yes, the wet ones. Barefoot. They're laughing about something ridiculous. Maybe the turnip dance. Maybe the queen's perfectly arched eyebrow. Maybe the fact that none of this was supposed to work. She turns to him and says, "Do you think we'll always have to prove ourselves?" And he, without pause, replies, I think only to people who weren't listening the first time. They stop at a small bench, carved with ivy patterns. The rain has begun again, but gently, like the sky itself is sighing with relief. The prince shrugs off his cloak and wraps it around her shoulders. You pause here, let the image settle. Two people, tired but luminous, wrapped in cloak and rain light. No crowns in sight. It's not the kind of ending you find in tapestries, but it's the one that matters. And somewhere in the shadows of the castle, the storyteller chuckles to himself and mutters, they'll tell this one for years. The fire is lower now, not out, but ebbing, glowing in slow, pulsing breaths, like the embers are dreaming their own sleepy little story. You sit back in your chair, wrapped in a blanket you don't remember grabbing, eyes half closed, head tilting to one side like a drowsy painting. The storyteller, who hasn't moved from his place near the hearth, stretches his legs with a grunt that might be half the tale itself. Rain ticks steadily outside the stone walls, like a metronome made from old tin and gentle clouds. And just when you think he might nod off, he speaks again, this time almost to himself. You know, there's always one last version of the story, the forgotten one, the after the end. You lean in. It begins like this. The new princess, now properly married, properly, adored, and somewhat accidentally mythologized, discovers that royal life is complicated. Turns out, being a princess doesn't mean constant gowns and picnics. It means meetings, endless ceremonial greetings, formal luncheons with people named Lord something of somewhere you've never heard of. It means a smile you wear like armor, and slippers that pinch just a little more than they should. But worst of all, it means people stop asking how you slept. That part, oddly enough, is what gets to her. She, who was once defined by a night of sleepless discomfort, is now expected to glide gracefully through castle life like someone who never bruised, never flinched, never admitted to anything less than perfect rest. And so, she begins collecting stories, small ones, quiet ones. She visits the kitchens late at night and listens to the scullery maid whisper about a dream she had of swimming through rose petals. She stops by the stable to hear the farrier's tale of the ghost horse who only appears during lightning storms. She lingers in the library and finds the gardener asleep on a pile of travel maps, muttering something about a forgotten island. The princess starts writing them down, carefully, lovingly, in a book she keeps hidden under her pillow. Yes, even now, out of habit. She titles it Rainy Stories for Sleepless Nights. It becomes a secret tradition. People from the kingdom, high-born and low, begin slipping notes to her at feasts and festivals. Here's one, they say, for your collection. And slowly, her book grows fat with tales. Not legends of kings and battles, but stories about things like the goose who stole a bishop's hat, or the old woman who traded a recipe for a blessing, or the child who claimed to hear the moon humming. It's never published. It's not meant to be. But in time, the queen reads it. And one night, when the rain comes again, heavier and more dramatic than it's been in years, the queen invites her daughter-in-law to the long-forgotten solar at the top of the West Tower. There's a fire waiting, a pot of tea, a silence thick with memory. And the queen, of all people, says, "Tell me a story." The storyteller in the firelit hall pauses here, just long enough for your heart to go warm in your chest. And you realize you've been inside that story all along. Because stories, like rain, don't always arrive cleanly. Sometimes they seep in, Sometimes they trickle, and sometimes they crash down with thunder and drama and a very unfortunate hat. Historians still argue whether that last tale, the secret story-gathering princess, is a late addition to the folklore or simply a newer interpretation passed down in quiet oral traditions. Some say it was Andersen's own metaphor for how the best stories don't come from royalty, but from the world around them. Others insist it's entirely fictional, made up by a traveling bard to win a warm bed and a second bowl of stew. But it doesn't matter, because here you are, curled under a blanket, listening as if you've known the story your whole life. The storyteller finishes his tea, leans back in his chair, and says, "You never really know what kind of tale you're in until the rain starts falling." And outside, it's still falling, but softer now. You look around the room. Everyone else has drifted off, faces slack with sleep or tucked into the curve of someone else's shoulder. The fire throws a few final sparks. A dog sighs in its sleep. The storyteller meets your eye, just for a moment. "Remember," he says, "there's always one more story." And he points upward, to a door, a quiet one, set in the back wall of the hall, where stone meets shadow. You hadn't noticed it before. It's cracked open just enough to let a sliver of golden lamplight through. You rise, slowly, and walk toward it, because the night isn't over yet, and neither is the dream. The door creaks as you push it open, the sound sharp in the hush of the sleeping hall. Beyond it lies a narrow stone staircase, spiraling upward, lit only by flickering sconces that throw shadows like ghosts dancing in slow circles. You hesitate, because obviously this is the part in every story where something strange happens. But your feet move anyway, slowly, softly, one step at a time. The walls are damp and cool, the scent of old moss and candle wax rising with you. You pass a shuttered window where the rain is still tapping gently. Somewhere below, the storyteller's voice has fallen silent. The fire has dimmed to coals, and still you climb. At the top, the staircase ends not in a tower chamber, not in a dusty attic, but in a small round room. Cozy, hidden, as if the castle itself exhaled and made space just for this. There's no throne here, no court, just a low table, two mismatched chairs, and, sitting on a cushion in the corner, a woman in a dark wool cloak, reading by lantern light. She doesn't look up. Yet. But you know who she is. The bride. The girl. The princess. The one with bruises and questions and the kind of heart that notices more than it should. She's older now, just a little, but her eyes are exactly the same, quietly alert, still taking everything in. You clear your throat. She glances up, unsurprised, and smiles. "Looking for a story?" You nod. She gestures to the cushion across from her. You sit. On the table before you is a box, small, wooden, carved with ivy leaves and moons. She lifts the lid. Inside are slips of parchment, neatly folded, bound with ribbon and thread, each one labeled in tiny script. You lean closer. Read a few. The boy who slept through a siege, the lady who loved thorns, the kingdom that forgot its own name. She picks one, reads it silently, then shakes her head and returns it to the box. "No," she says, almost to herself. "Not tonight." She tries another. This time she nods and begins. Her voice is soft, sure, unhurried, and as she speaks, the world folds around her. You're no longer in the tower. You're in a field of wild wheat, golden and heavy under a low blue sky. A scarecrow with a crown is telling riddles to a fox. A windmill turns backwards. Somewhere, bells ring in a city that doesn't exist. It's dreamlike, sleep adjacent, a story not made to explain anything, but simply to be. And this, you understand, is the real legacy, not titles, not castles, not whether someone felt a pee. It's this, the moment shared between two quiet people in a forgotten room, passing along fragments of imagination like fire from candle to candle. The rain outside has faded to mist. You can see it now through a round window behind her, just low clouds kissing the earth, silver and soft. She finishes the story, closes the box. Neither of you speaks for a while. Then she says, "People think stories make things clearer, but really, they just make things felt." You nod, because you felt it too. She looks at you, almost mischievously. "Would you like to tell one?" You blink. She tilts her head. "Everyone's got at least one, even if it's borrowed." You open your mouth. Something rises, a half memory, a voice from your own childhood, a storm, a flashlight under a blanket, someone whispering, "Once upon a time." And just like that, it begins. She listens. The tower listens. Even the castle, it seems, leans in. Because now the storyteller is you. You, who have traveled through this tale, through rain and royalty and laughter and loss. You, who have listened so well. You, who carry stories the way some people carry scars. And it's in the telling that you finally understand. The point of the P, of the test, of the absurd stacking of mattresses was never about pain. It was about being believed. You finish your tale. She smiles. And with a small nod, she hands you one of the slips of parchment. Blank. For your own. The lantern flickers. The mist outside begins to glow, just a little. And below, the fire has gone out. You descend the winding staircase with the blank slip of parchment in your pocket, fingers brushing against it like it's made of moonlight. The castle below is silent now, not hushed, but deeply, reverently quiet. The kind of quiet that arrives only after something has ended, or just begun. The great hall is dark. Coals in the hearth glow like sleepy dragon eyes. The guests are gone, some to bed, some back to stories of their own, some to places you'll never quite find again. You pause near the storyteller's empty chair. It's still warm. A candle flickers on the mantel. Someone, perhaps him, perhaps you, has left a folded blanket on the armrest. Beside it sits the faint imprint of a teacup, long since cooled. The storm is past. You wander through the castle now as if in a dream, past empty banquet tables, through courtyards wet with fresh rain, under high windows where moonlight breaks across the stone in shimmering slants. Everywhere you go, there are echoes of the tale. The P, the girl, the test, the wedding, the question of whether sensitivity is weakness or its own kind of armor. You think again of Hans Christian Andersen, how he was said to be too delicate, too odd, too sensitive for his time. He was ridiculed for his voice, his awkwardness, his longing. He never married. He never quite belonged. And yet, he gave us this story, and others like it. Stories where being different wasn't just accepted, it was central, sacred even. Historians still argue whether Andersen was poking fun at royal traditions or trying to elevate them. Was The Princess and the Pea meant as satire? As celebration? As an inside joke between lonely people who understood that some aches never go away? No one knows for certain. But you think maybe the real answer is this. It was a love letter to those who feel too much and are told to hide it. Because that's what the P was, wasn't it? A symbol of the way small things matter. of how discomfort ignored becomes a bruise, of how being awake to pain, to joy, to the world itself isn't failure, it's humanity. You find yourself back at the main gate now, the castle behind you glowing faintly with candlelight and memory. And outside, the land is wet and shimmering. The road ahead is soft with mud, the air full of the scent of lavender and fresh moss. A frog croaks nearby. A bird sings a few confused notes. Somewhere off in the woods, a lantern flickers. Another traveler, perhaps, beginning their own story. You reach into your pocket and run your fingers over the parchment again. Still blank. Still waiting. You sit on the low wall by the gate and think, maybe it doesn't need to be filled tonight. Maybe just carrying it is enough. A reminder that your story, like every story, is still being written. The castle door creaks shut behind you. Not a slam, not an end, just a pause. You rise. The path ahead bends gently toward a quiet forest, then vanishes behind a hill. You don't know where it leads exactly, but you're not afraid. You've been through rain and shadow, through tales within tales, through tests no one prepared you for. And now, you carry your own. You follow the road. It's soft underfoot, the kind of mud that doesn't fight your step, but welcomes it. Quiet, steady, sponge-like earth still saturated from the storm. The air is cool, dew-sweet, rich with that strange after-rain perfume. Crushed petals, soaked bark, something faintly metallic, like the sky is still remembering lightning. The moon slips in and out of clouds above you. The trees arch on either side like cathedral vaults. No wind, no voices, just the soft sounds of water moving, dripping, trickling, soaking into moss and stone. Your thoughts begin to slow. No more princes, no more queens, no mattresses stacked absurdly high. Just you, the darkened forest path, and the echo of a story that somehow wrapped itself around your bones when you weren't looking. And this, you think, is where stories go when they're done being told. Not into books, not into scrolls or dusty archives, but into you. You're the archive. The girl in the story isn't just a character anymore. She's a symbol of something small but undeniable. The right to feel discomfort and still be believed. To speak softly and still be heard. To bruise and still be royal. You remember how the queen tested her. Twice. First with the pea, then with the feast. But the third test? That came in silence. In the time after the story, when no one was watching. When she stayed kind anyway. The unspectacular moments. That's where the real tale lives. You pass a mossy milestone at the edge of the road. There's no writing on it, just a carving, barely visible, a tiny crown above a circle. Could be a pea, could be a moon, could be both. You smile, just a little. Somewhere behind you, the castle's towers disappear into the mist. The story is still there, for others. But it's no longer holding you. You're free to move forward now, and yet, you still feel the storyteller's presence, like a warm cloak around your shoulders. He wasn't just telling you a tale, was he? He was teaching you how to carry one, how to spot them growing like mushrooms in strange corners of the world, how to know which ones to keep and which ones to gently let dissolve like mist in morning light. Historians still argue whether bedtime stories for grown-ups are indulgent nonsense or ancient necessity. Some scoff, some shrug. Others whisper about how, long before books, it was stories that sang people to sleep, that lulled farmers after long harvests, that soothed warriors with ghosts in their heads, that helped lonely princesses feel like someone understood. Maybe storytelling is the oldest form of healing, the most polite kind of magic, You pass under a willow now, its dripping leaves brushing your shoulder like fingers bidding goodnight. A stone bench waits beneath it. You don't mean to sit, but your body decides for you. And there you are, still, wrapped in twilight and the hush of a world just starting to dream again. You reach into your pocket and pull out the parchment, still blank, still waiting. You smooth it gently in your lap. A small firefly dances nearby. You consider writing something. Instead, you whisper, "Once upon a time," and you don't need to say more, because you know the rest. And for now, that's enough. So now, let it all settle. Let the story wrap around you like fog softening the edges of a quiet world. No need to chase the ending, or unravel the lessons, or even remember the details. Just let it be. The castle is far behind you now, its towers blurred in memory, its halls echoing with laughter and rain. You carry its stories not in your hands, but in your breath, your bones, your silence, in the soft understanding that even the smallest discomfort, like a single pea, can speak volumes. Your footsteps slow. The path ahead blurs into shadow, and shadow blurs into sleep. Rain returns in the distance, not to disturb, but to lull. A soft, steady percussion on the canopy above, a rhythm older than language. The world becomes smaller, closer. You sink into stillness, into quiet. Your shoulders ease, your jaw loosens, your eyes grow heavy, not because the story is over, but because it has finished exactly what it needed to do. So rest now. You've walked through wonder. You've sat beside queens. You've watched storms give birth to stories, and stories fade into dreams. And you, delicate one, have felt it all. Let the world fall away. Let the rain sing you down, and may your sleep be deep, dream dappled, and ever so slightly enchanted. End of script. Sweet dreams.